All right, welcome everyone to tonight's program, Curator's Choice, Road Trips, Campers, and the Great Outdoors. My name is Brittany Ballinger, and I'm the Senior Graphic Designer at the Wilsonian FIU, and tonight I'm joined by Isabel Sanz. Isabel Sanz is the Digital Asset and Collection Data Manager at the Wilsonian FIU. Isabel manages the museum's online digital catalog and digital initiatives. She also supervises the museum's metadata squad, a team of public history graduate students from FIU who are tasked with researching and digitizing the museum's collection. Her work primarily focuses on providing public access to the museum's collection through multiple online platforms such as web applications, Google Arts and Culture, and other platforms. She has an MA in history from FIU with a focus in public history and museum studies. So tonight, we're taking a virtual summer road trip. Isabel will guide us through the intersection of leisure, automobiles, and national parks in the early 20th century. We'll explore the evolution of the camper trailer, discover America's love affair with the great outdoors, and find out how packing into a car for a few weeks at a time became the ultimate escape. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A. And thank you for joining us, Isabel.
Thanks, Britt. Thank you for that really kind introduction. And thank you to all of you for spending part of your evening with me as we explore how road trips, campers, and the great outdoors all intersect through the lens of our collection. So for this next hour or so, we'll be looking a little closer at our postcards, posters, photographs, and other ephemera of the great outdoors and ephemera from road trips. I think one of the really special parts about this talk is to be able to examine road trips and the outdoors through the ephemera that we often collect when we're out there. So I can't be the only person who goes on a trip and always wishes there was a little more room in their suitcase for all the souvenirs and other material culture that we bring back. So to get started, we're going to actually start with postcards. So particularly the great outdoors, looking at national parks. So this is a souvenir folder, and it is of the first national park, which was Yellowstone. It was established in 1872 by an act of Congress. And it's important to note that there are some discrepancies. Some people do state that Hot Springs National Park outside of Little Rock, Arkansas was the first national park since it was established in 1832. But it's important to remember that that date is actually for when Hot Springs was established as a national reserve, primarily so that the US government could regulate a utility, in particular hot water in the case of the hot springs. So Yellowstone is our first national park. And within this souvenir folder, it was published in 1940 by the Haynes Studio Company, you had all sorts of postcards, typically about 7 or 8, all interconnected. And they usually presented a really interesting view of your trip, right? So the highlights. So this first one here, again from 1940, is Yellowstone Lake and Mount Sheridan. And what's really fascinating about this is how tranquil and empty and isolated the landscape feels, right? So it is filled with foliage, it's filled with beautiful Yellowstone Lake, but it does feel untouched. It feels pretty devoid of any human contact, even though someone had to have gone out and photographed it. There are no man-made structures, and there's certainly no human subjects. And this carries through to the other postcards in the series. This one is Sylvan Lake and Top Notch Peak. Again, you've got this vast expanse. You've got pristine nature in its purest and rawest form. And you have this idea of an idyllic scene set before you, which is really important and jives with the ideas of leisure and surrounding the great outdoors time period. So people were flocking to the great outdoors, to these parks at the turn of the century for various reasons. One of them mainly being an increase in expendable income. So they had the means to do it. The automobile is also, and we'll touch on that a little later, is also becoming more readily available and less expensive. And also around this time period, we have the end of the Great Depression happening. And throughout the Great Depression, we have the WPA hard at work creating posters, advertising traveling in the US, and also creating highways. So not only artists are being hired, but also laborers to create new roadways for tourists to travel on. And we're going to touch on that in a minute. So here, this is a poster, The Lore of the National Parks, 1934. It was commissioned by the National Park Service. And you have the same echo of some of the themes from the previous postcards. So these are themes that aren't only unique to postcards and to advertising agencies, but also to the National Park Service itself. And that theme is the idea of a wide open space, nature being this vast area to explore. And what's most notable here is the inclusion of people, particularly people doing a leisure activity that would have been familiar to most people, still familiar today, which is horseback riding. They look like they're being guided through the wilderness. They look quite comfortable. And it's important here to notice that this is for the national parks in general. So it's not a specific park like the postcards before were. This could apply to anyone, regardless of what your travel plans or travel interests were, the national parks lured you in. And there's also that idea of the outdoors being this tantalizing, tempting place. The other thing that's also happening is the urban pressures of these urban city centers are mounting. So people are more on rigid schedules. They've got timetables to keep. And there's a lot of literature during this time period, especially in advertising, as the great outdoors being this place to recharge, to escape, and to really commune with nature. So to get back to the essence of what makes us human in a way. This is another series of posters, also created during the WPA program, See America, Welcome to Montana. So this isn't particularly for any national park, but just the wilds of Montana. We again have a highly stylized outdoor setting, lots of bright, inviting colors. I noticed that nothing here is particularly hostile, it's quite inviting. And then this also touches on another element that we're seeing around leisure, another idea or theme rather, and that's the idea that seeing America, America is yours to see. It is an act of civic duty. It's an act of patriotism to go out and see the greater United States. And this was directed at, the message of patriotism is directed at domestic tourists, but also international tourists are called to see the beauty of the United States. And this was something that was really intentional during the WPA program to bolster spirits and the belief that the United States after the Great Depression would still be able to regain its place as a world leader. And then again, we have another theme also happening, similar series, same time period, wildlife. The national park preserves all life. Again, national park in general, right? Not a specific idea. But what I love about this is the animal that they've chosen is a doe, right? So it's not a particularly ferocious grizzly. It's not something that is particularly wild or dangerous. It's something that most people in the continental United States are familiar with. They recognize a doe, and it's something that's comforting. I especially love the single ray of light drawing your eye towards the doe. Again, a very poetic interpretation of nature, something that almost is reminiscent of like a holy experience, right, with those rays of light. So our next one is Yosemite National Park, created by the Curry Company, but also commissioned by Yosemite National Park itself. So one of the really interesting things here is that Yosemite is an older national park, but if you notice, here there are people everywhere, which is fascinating. So we have people fly fishing over here in the middle left. We have someone ice skating in the bottom. We have horseback riding. We've got more trail pack riding here. And most notably is we have the appearance of a modern comfort. So this modern comfort here is a swimming pool. Something that isn't notable for raw nature or anything like that, but it's there. It's there for people to use. And it's a reminder that you can enjoy the great outdoors, but still be comfortable. We also have a picnic area. So the National Park Service doesn't have to be devoid of any comforts, modern day comforts. They're actually there for you to enjoy. And what I love here is you've got the inclusion of something dangerous, the grizzly bear, but they're here with families, right? They have these two cute little cubs. You've got the doe and her fawn. And you also have, oh, hold on, I do have sound breaking up. Give me one moment. And let me see if I can fix that because I do want you guys to be able to hear me. Bear with me one second. All right, I feel like that might be a little better. Hopefully you all can hear me. If not, I can definitely move indoors if that's better. So we have the picnic grounds, and we have the inclusion of something really interesting, which is back here, and it is the car, right? So you can drive your car through the tree. That's something that we all have in popular culture in our memories, and it is really interesting because in a place that it is really supposed to be devoid of nature, devoid of man-made objects, we have the inclusion of them and the inclusion of luxuries. So what's really interesting here is these are two thoughts that, or two ideas that seem to be parallel and maybe even exclusive of one another, but they're not. They're actually one and the same. So you can have this raw understanding of nature, this recharging communion with a pristine, untouched wilderness, while also having your swimming pool, while also driving your motor car to a tree. And I think that's what's really interesting about the ideas of leisure and the ideas of travel for this time period in particular. You have ideas that seem mutually exclusive at face value, but are actually able to coexist and coexist quite well. And that's something that we're going to see in our end of our presentation when we talk about trailers. Okay. So next we have, again, we return to the postcard, and these are really fascinating because we have the car, again, front and center. You have raw, untouched wilderness behind you in the form of the Grand Canyon. And the title here is Near Mojave Point on the Grand Canyon Rim Drive. And I want to focus on the word drive. So this is circa 1940. You have the family touring car becoming really popular. And then the idea of travel and comfort really going hand in hand. I'd like to draw attention to the tourist in the bottom right-hand corner of the postcard. Notice they're not dressed for the extreme fluctuations in temperature and in the environment of the Grand Canyon, right? They're dressed to kill. They look great. They're out there enjoying a luxurious drive throughout the Grand Canyon, or around the rim rather. And this is really interesting because I think it kind of cues to visitors as you're sending this to mom and pop who maybe haven't visited the Grand Canyon, or as you're remembering this experience when you look at this postcard, that you can have both. So I also think it speaks a lot to the feedback loop that material culture for trips and road trips in particular creates. And for that, we're going to move to the next postcard, also covering the Grand Canyon. This is really interesting too, because again, if I hadn't told you that this was for the Grand Canyon and you couldn't see the caption, you wouldn't know what we're looking at. You're looking at a large, luxurious hotel. This is the Hotel El Tovar, which boasts canyon views. You can actually still stay there today if you're interested when you visit the Grand Canyon National Park. But the canyon is regulated to this little corner, this little peep in the top right. So front and center is this luxurious upscale experience. And again, comfort and nature going hand in hand. I also wanted to draw attention to the technology that was used in creating this poster. So the first thing to note is that this postcard is actually printed on a linen cardstock, which is really important because it better holds the colors and the pigments that are printed on it. This was produced by the Curtis Tech Company in 1940, and they had a patented Technicolor process. So they used the linen cardstock, and the other thing that they did, which was really interesting, is whenever they had new product or new demand for product, instead of sending an artist out to draw a new scene and printing a new scene, they would actually just have their artists select a different palette of colors. So you would have new product in this kind of sort of semi-automated way. And this was all engineered not only by Curtis Type, that company, but also by the Fred Harvey Company. So we may know Fred Harvey, many of you may, from the Harvey House endeavors. So Fred Harvey, it's important to note that he was passed when this was printed. It was in 1906. So the Fred Harvey was famous for the Harvey Houses, which was a chain of houses or hotels and restaurants along the Santa Fe Railroad. The Harvey House Company is actually credited with creating the first hotel chain, which is fascinating. They commodified the idea of going out, or rather standardized the idea of a clean, quick stay and a clean, quick meal. And they were actually one of the premier accounts and the largest accounts for the Curtis Tite Company. And this goes back to the idea of a feedback loop, not a closed loop, but the feedback loop that kept generating and evolving the ideas of literature, of leisure. So you have this loop where you visit this place, you buy a postcard, and whether you mail it or not, the postcard influences your remembrance of your trip. So you remember comfort, you remember luxury, you remember untouched nature if you buy one of the previous postcards. But then if you mail it, it's also shaping the ideas and expectations of others who perhaps haven't visited this location. So I'm getting postcards from Yellowstone and I'm expecting the same untouched, ideal experience. I'm getting postcards from the Hotel El Tovar and I'm expecting the same ideas, or at least to see, maybe not experience if I don't have the resources, but at least see the same levels of luxury and comfort being available. So one of the really exciting things about having, and that's actually on this one, we're actually going to get to read some of these postcards, which is really interesting. So this is, again, it's called, another postcard, it's called I'm at the Fred Harvey Hotel marked X, circa 1946. Again, produced by the Fred Harvey Company. And here you can get a better idea of the Fred Harvey Hotel empire in the Southwest. Again, credited with creating one of the first hotel chains. You'll notice here you have some that are restaurant only, especially here in Hollywood, but then you have other hotels along the highway. And you've got them, you have the distance between them delineated. And the idea was you'd mark where you are and send it off. So again, the fun part about having postcards in our collection is that some of them have actually been mailed. So this one was mailed on August 19th, 1946 from the Grand Canyon in Arizona. And it says, I have it written down here, 2:20 p.m. Monday, arrived here today about 11:30. Beautiful scenery on the way up, tall pine trees and some spruce and cedar. Just ate lunch, write more later, babe. And it was addressed to a Mr. and Mrs. G.V. Berger in San Antonio, Texas. So these are being actively used or kept, and again, further contributing to that feedback loop. This is another example of how Fred Harvey and the chain of hotels and restaurants really became kind of like an not all-inclusive, but an experience in and of itself. So you go to the Grand Canyon, you experience the Grand Canyon, you travel throughout the Southwest, but staying at a Fred Harvey hotel or eating at one of the restaurants is an experience in of itself. So this is a paper bag, which would have been used to package postcards or anything else you bought at one of the gift shops. And what I think is really interesting is you'll see the like picturesque scenes that have been chosen to be printed. You've got horses in a corral, you've got a buggy up here, all the way at the bottom, you have what looks like a farmer, perhaps dragging or carting their produce or products somewhere. You've got a general store, and you've got a lot of flora and fauna and some geographic landscapes or geological landscapes that are reminiscent of and symbolize the Southwest, which is really interesting. But I do want to talk about something as we kind of move from road trips, as we move into road trips and we talk a little bit more about the experience of comfort. All of these comforts and all of these amenities weren't necessarily available to everyone in the US, particularly the African-American community, especially if we are talking south of the Mason-Dixon line, right? So in Jim Crow states. Here we have a photograph from Shenandoah National Park. It's a bus tour circa 1950. This is courtesy of the National Park Service. And you have a city club out and enjoying nature. This was seen also with church groups, societies, fraternities. You had large groups, you had families. So even if they weren't welcome south of the Mason-Dixon line, the African-American groups and societies did try to get out and enjoy the great outdoors for the very same reasons that you have white populations enjoying the great outdoors, wanting to escape from the urban pressures, having more disposable income. It is important to note, though, that the road trip in particular became a growing sense of freedom as well, because you didn't have to ride on segregated railway cars. You could instead get in your own car, and it was kind of a release and a break from the rising racial oppression that African Americans were experiencing in their daily lives, especially in the South. But this wasn't without its dangers. So this is also courtesy of the National Park Service. It's the Lewis Mountain entrance, which is the African American segregated area in Shenandoah National Park, circa 1944. And what I want to draw attention to is you'll see that it has a coffee shop, it has cottages, campgrounds, picnic grounds. So every aspect that we just spoke about and discussed in our previous slides, the quick and easy foods, the convenient places to stay, were unavailable, especially south of that Mason-Dixon line, especially in towns in the South where segregation, customs, and rules varied from city to city or town to town, depending on where you were, and especially with the existence of sundowner towns, so where African Americans could not stay overnight in these towns. So traveling did have an extra element of danger and uncertainty that white populations did not have to deal with. And as a response to this, in 1936, a man by the name of Victor Hugo created something. Victor H. Green created the Green Book. So this one is from 1940. It's from the New York Public Library's digital collection. And it was a directory of garages that African Americans would be welcomed at. So if you're out on the road and your car breaks down, where is a safe place that you can stop and get service? Gas stations. So even the simple act of refueling could be fraught with danger. Roadhouses, restaurants, hotels, barbershops, beauty salons. Notice that it's not just the bare essentials, so gas and hotel and food, but also comforts and luxuries like barbershops and beauty salons. So we're going to take a step back from 1936 to 1927. This is an advertisement page for the Crisis magazine, which was a very prominent, well-renowned African American magazine published in the first half of the 1900s. And in the bottom right corner, this is basically how before 1936 you would learn, aside from word of mouth, and another is through advertisements. There are two advertisements here for African American hotels. But of course, if you happen to not have the magazine with you, if the two destinations listed here, one is Massachusetts and one's in Pennsylvania, aren't the places you're going, you really are at a loss, which again speaks to the ingenuity and the commitment to enjoying the outdoors and to leisure on behalf of the Green Book and Victor H. Green himself. So in this Green Book, you would also find destinations that were welcoming to African Americans. And we actually have a few down here in South Florida. So one of these is Virginia Key Beach. This is courtesy of the historic Virginia Key Trust. And it's taken circa 1950. And this beach was established for African Americans after a weighed-in protest that took place a few years earlier in Haulover Beach. You also had the historic Hampton House, then known as the Hampton Inn Motel. This is a recent, fairly recent photo provided by the historic Hampton House. You'll see that this was a really large, it was a 50-room mid-century hotel. It had a 24-hour eatery, it had a concierge service. It even had a pool, which in this photo shows that in current times it's been converted to a fountain. And it also had an A-list of A-list guests. So we've all probably seen this photo, maybe especially if you've watched One Night in Miami, that most recent film. It's Malcolm X photographing Muhammad Ali. So this is after he wins his championship title. He fought on Miami Beach, but unfortunately is not able to stay on Miami Beach. And this was true of many performers, African-American performers during the time period. So he stayed over here. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his family were frequent guests, as well as big names like Aretha Franklin, Dizzy Gillespie, Sammy Davis Jr., just to name a few. So it's important to note that as we talk about comfort, as we talk about convenience, to see how the different societal and racial pressures of the day are shaping how different communities respond, how they exert their dignity and still find ways to explore leisure activities and commune with nature. And a great way that happens is through trailers. So this is probably my favorite part of our presentation because I really think it comes together and fuses two very different ideas that we kind of touched on, right? So it fuses a little bit the idea of going out and exploring and going where the road takes you, but also with the idea that at the end of the day, you probably want a comfortable, clean place to sleep, right? And while you may not want to be tied to a hotel reservation, you may not want to be tied to a timetable, because again, that's reminding you of modern life and the pressures of modern life. You still do want to be somewhere that's relatively comfortable. So here we have a postcard, Warner Trailer Sales from Phoenix, Arizona. And what's really interesting here is you'll see the variety, a bit of trailers. So these first three are quite large. You have a smaller, what almost looks like an Airstream here in the bottom right corner. You've got trailer towing services. So for the purpose of this talk, I do want to point out that when I mean trailer, I do mean something that you can hitch to the back of what was then known and still known as a power car, right? You needed something to pull it. We're not talking about vehicles that you could drive. So like an RV or a recreational vehicle isn't what we're talking about here. But we will get into the different types of trailers and the different types of vehicles in just a moment. So trailers have various layers to them. So on top of fusing these two ideas of the great outdoors and comfort, you often see them in conversation with one another in popular culture and in really fun ways. So this cartoon or animated postcard is really interesting. You'll see the echo of "See America First" here. And then the text, "Home Sweet Home was never like this." This is from 1930, circa 1930. And it's the idea that, you know, you're out on the road, you're with family, but you're able to bring life with you, right? So the idea of getting away from it all without really getting away from it all, which I find fascinating. This is another one that's also really interesting. It says, high up on a hill, I've parked the trailer and wife, not a care in the world to worry us, brother, this is the life. So we have the male figure up on top. He says, I bet you no one will horn in up here. And then we have the wife overlooking. There's a sign in front of her that says, from this mountain, you can see 7 states. And I think this is just a lovely fusion of all of those ideas that we've mentioned. Out in the distance, you'll see the city, right? So they are not only geographically far removed from the city, but they are also like mentally disconnected from city life. You've got another, modern thing happening here. You've got a factory, you've got what looks like a steamboat or steamship. But up here, it's pristine, it's untouched. And what I find really interesting is you have you've spent resources to get away from it all, to bring family, but you are also worried about not wanting to be near other people in this particular instance, which is really interesting because, and we'll get into it in a minute, community is also something that starts to become a theme in trailer or in camp culture. Another fun instance, and this of writing, and this one says, Mom, I'm going to Aunt Nora's Sunday. That is the day you get this, and then you can start sending letters. And then what I think is particularly ominous, it ends with, don't forget what you said. It is sent to Evelyn Lewis in St. Louis. And the rather threatening note was sent on June of 1943 from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. So again, you have popular culture, the idea of trailers, the idea of purchasing them and going out into the wilderness with your home being proliferated. And it references, again, that feedback loop, not a closed feedback loop because ideas keep evolving, but a feedback loop nonetheless. And this is where community comes in. So interestingly enough, this is called a trailer camp down Florida Way, circa 1939. Interestingly enough, while the trailers all look the same, there's lots of literature during this time period that talks about the egalitarian qualities or the equalizing element of owning a trailer. So they talk about how this is like one of the few instances where a businessman from New York is neighbors with a farmer from South Carolina. They talk about how these experiences go beyond state lines and people stop thinking of themselves as regional lists, but more as Americans or as part of the same country. And again, this echoes that idea of see America, the idea of and it's your civic or patriotic duty to engage with the pristine wilderness surrounding you. And it's seen as a good thing and as a patriotic thing, which I find fascinating because it does also seem to kind of be opposed to the idea of like a pristine, untouched nature by yourself. But as we'll see, this is actually the community and the ability to entertain and socialize on your own terms is really appealing and also something that is marketed quite often. So now we're going to go into my favorite part of the presentation, and we're going to talk about trailers in particular. So we're first going to start with the Gilkey camp trailer. This is a brochure advertising about the trailer from circa 1935. And it is perhaps the one of the more humble trailers that we're going to look at out of the three. So the first thing I want to notice here, it says luggage carrying space. And then the description here is all about ease, access, and also saving money, which is an interesting marketing ploy. So Gilkey trailers fold low and compact, which reduces wind resistance and gives clear rear vision. All the weight of the trailer is carried on its own Timken roller bearings, adding no weight to the car. These extra large bearings make the trailer roll so easily that there is no noticeable increase in the car's gasoline consumption. And this is something that you see quite often, the idea that investing in one of these trailers or campers would reduce your costs on the road, right? So you often have marketers talking about how you'll save a bunch of money by being able to cook your meals inside or store food. You'll save a bunch of money by not having to pay for hotel stays. So the idea of independence, being able to go where you want on these newly created and newly paved roads is really appealing. But there also is that financial aspect, which we see with our last two trailers will sort of fall apart a little bit. So let's step inside the Gilkey. Here on the bottom left, it's the other side of the pamphlet, and you'll see that it's popped up. So this is a pop-up trailer or a pop-up camper. It's got two windows, it's got a door, and it actually looks much more impressive than it does folded down. Here on the bottom right, you can see it being towed by the power car, and it's your simple ball hitch that we still use today for trailers and boats. And that's important because we will talk a little bit more about technological developments. So as you step inside, you'll notice that it's quite roomy for what it appears to be. You have two beds, you have a floor covering in the middle, and then you've got lots of storage space, which is pretty interesting for goods, for clothing, for any other kits, anything else that's part of your mess kit. You can actually go beyond a mess kit, which is one of the convenient things. And then if you look straight down the middle, you'll see that there's what looks like a hot pot or a burner, and there's a kettle on. It's probably maybe for coffee, which is really interesting too. So the idea that you can just get up, start your morning in the great outdoors at a relatively low investment. So the price point for the Gilkey camper in 1935 was about $395, which adjusted for inflation brings us to $7,800. Give or take. So this would be something that is fully furnished in the sense that you do have the floor covering, you do have the beds, but the mess kit and any other goods you would have to provision yourself. There are, or rather there were companies that did offer to give you kits as well. So that was something that was ultra convenient and also contributed to the burgeoning recreational outdoors industry. So from there, we move up a step to the covered wagon. Again, it starts furnished at $395, which in 1939 is about $7,700, still about the same price point, $7,800. But what's really interesting is it offered different tiers. So this is also from our collection. This is from the inside of another brochure about the covered wagon, also from 1939. And you'll see that the inside is quite luxurious, quite spacious, and quite different from the interior of the Gilkey. So we'll start with the basic model at $395. Didn't include a toilet, didn't include a shower. It's not featured here. It had beds, it had an ice box, and it had some storage space. So what you would need basically to not have to put up a tent, right? But you would still have to find outdoor facilities to use the restroom and to bathe. It didn't have a sink, so you would need one to cook, but it did have a water tank. If you moved up a tier, which isn't quite yet the tier that's here, this is the custom model, but if you moved up to the deluxe, you would then be spending about $785, which comes out to about $15,000 in today's money. And there you are afforded a sink. You did have a septic toilet, but still no shower stall or shower head. And you did have a sink for cooking and for using the bathroom. You didn't have two separate sinks, which is important to note. You did have an extra bed and you did have a little more space. And then we moved to the top of the line custom model, which would have run you $1,185 back in 1939, which translates to about $23,000. And that's what you're seeing here. So you'll notice you have in this top left, you've got ample beds, you've got room for storage and cabinets, but you also have, most interestingly, a tiled bathtub and toilet. So you don't have to go outside. It's very convenient. It had a larger capacity water tank. It had two sinks. You may be able to see part of them here in the top left photo as well. One for, well, you'd see the kitchen sink here. The bathroom sink is probably back here. So you had two distinct areas. And then most importantly, here in the bottom right, you have an area for entertaining. You have an area to go out and bring your friends in, right? So go in rather and bring your friends from outside in, travel with others. So that's really interesting. And also these usually converted into a bed. So you had more sleeping room. And then we get to one of the top of the line companies, the Aerocar land yacht. So this is from 1936. It's also from our collection, produced by the Aerocar company of Detroit. Travel in luxurious comfort in unsurpassed style. So we're going to take a peek on the inside, and this is really amazing because we do see different technological advances happening here. So if you look to the bottom right here, you'll notice the aero coupler. So they had the Aerocar land yacht company something called fifth wheel technology. So rather than the ball hitch that we're used to, they actually had what looks like here is like it's a tire that anchors the or wheel rather, not tire. The prototype was tire, but it's a wheel that anchors the trailer to the car. So this was designed for easy removal, so you could still use the car without the trailer, but it afforded a lot of stability, which made the Aerocar one of the few trailers that legally you could be in while the car was in motion. So this set it apart technologically, but also set it apart in terms of accessibility. So the cost for this trailer, base models started at $3,000 in 1936, which runs you to about $58,000 in today's money. And again, the allure of being able to sit in the trailer while it is being moved was huge. Mind you, though, you would need somebody to drive the car. So if you're moving in a family unit, perhaps someone could drive it, or we'll see in a minute, servants. So the idea for this was slightly different than for the Gilkey trailer or the covered wagon trailer that we looked at. So while Gilkey and covered wagon were meant for weekend trips to stay in, the Aerocar wasn't necessarily for that. It could be used for day trips. It's really popular among the moneyed classes for skiing trips or trips where you already have a home, but you want to be comfortable while you're out in the outdoors. So if you're skiing and you'd like to get warm, you have a shelter with all of the modern conveniences, which we'll get to in a minute. If you're down by the creek and you're fishing, you have somewhere where you can get dry, where you can change, you can shower. And even the custom models, which run to about $8,000 in 1936 money, which translates to about $156,000 in today's money, were highly customizable, and you could actually create and designate quarters for servants. The basic model sat about 6 to 10 people, but larger models could, there are reports of people cramming 19 to 20 people for the drive. And then we're going to take a quicker look here at these images. So you'll notice there isn't much attention being paid to sleeping quarters because of, again, the intended usage. So you've got a very comfortable and pretty wide by trailer standards kitchen. You've got an entertaining area, another one here. It is important to note though that these couches did convert into beds. So you did have that room. And here all along the right hand side are testimonials from what the Aerocar Land Yacht Company called skippers or owners of land yachts. And one of them goes like this. It says, 15 of us crowded and drove to Placid for skiing. And 19 had lunch on board, 20 degrees below zero, and all the time. So the stove was more than welcome. So on top of a cooking stove, this also had a heated stove for warmth and to make inhospitable environments a little more comfortable. And it continues, it says, Mrs. P and I spent the night when a few unexpected guests arrived at the home for vacation. So it's, again, the idea of being able to travel in comfort. It could be used as a lodging if necessary, but the idea was it would be kind of like an auxiliary place to stay. Which again goes into this idea of how leisure has evolved, right? So we have all of these different ideas, not competing for one another, but existing and kind of bleeding into one another, which is fascinating. And then, one of the things I highly recommend that you all do after this talk is to watch the Long trailer. It's got Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. They star as a newlywed couple who have decided to spend their honeymoon traveling cross country in a trailer, which they have purchased as their home. So rather than getting a stationary home, they purchase a trailer, and it involves a lot of the themes that you'll see here. And it's also just a lot of fun. This is from MGM Warner Brothers. It's not in our collection, but I think it is really indicative of how pervasive trailers and camping and the outdoors become in popular culture at the time. And to close, I wanted to end with this schematic drawing for a land yacht from Mr. Niles Graydon from 1967. So after the time period we're looking at, and you can see here the shell, and you'll see all of these specifications like sliding doors, club seats, all of these upgrades that just add to the luxury and comfort of the vehicle. But what I find most interesting here is the invoice. So if you notice here, this is a 1936 Aerocar camper. It's not a car in an Aerocar or a trailer from the 1960s. It's actually being retrofitted. So that's they're two separate invoices, but I think it's fascinating, the idea of still furnishing and rehashing and recycling. And the invoice here is dated from 1968 in April, and you'll notice he's purchasing something that was created in 1936. So I think it feeds into this theme and this idea of trailers still being really popular and the evolving ideas of the great outdoors and how they still influence how we interact and how we think about leisure and how we interact with leisure, with the great outdoors. So with that, that'll conclude the presentation portion. I'm really excited to continue the conversation with our Q&A. So, Britt?
That was awesome, Isabel. I am ready to rent a trailer. and head out west. So we actually have two questions. I have a question from an anonymous attendee that says, well, it's a compliment first. This is also fascinating. Question for you. Do you think there's a connection between the growth of the suburbs and the growth of the road trip? I imagine that more suburban dwellers means more car owners, and you can't have a road trip without a car.
Absolutely. So your question can actually be answered in two ways. So in the suburbs, you do have more, disposable income. You've got this other class rising, and yeah, you have cars becoming way more affordable. You have, again, that disposable income, and then with the WPA projects, you have roadways becoming more readily available for those new car owners to use. So absolutely. And there's actually a lot of scholarship around the development of the family touring vehicle, which would have definitely been marketed at the suburban dwellers for sure.
Very cool. And I have one again that says, really appreciate you going through the history nationally and locally. I learned that the term staycation dates back to the 1940s. While road trips were more popular back then, do you have any cultural artifacts or stories about people going on staycations, or perhaps hotels advertising to locals to take a vacation in their own backyard?
So that's a fascinating question. I did not come across staycations because I was geared more towards these areas. But what I did come across, which is really interesting, is the fact that people who now owned cars could turn what would have normally been a vacation trip into a day trip. So you now have something that's miles and miles away, readily accessible from like a longer day. So this becomes really common with like state parks. You often see that they have facilities for cars, in addition to parking lots and in addition to like camper sites, you have lots of picnic grounds. So not necessarily everyone who went to a state park would stay the weekend. They could just be out for a day. And I think that photograph that I had shown of the city bus tour from the African American City Club in the 1950s kind of speaks to that as well. That was definitely a day trip. But the staycation question is really interesting.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was that old. I have a question. Upon research, how much of a role do you think car manufacturers played in promoting road trips and advertising them to visiting national parks?
That is a great question. So for this talk, I didn't look at advertisements particularly created by car manufacturers. I focused more on national parks, but you definitely see cars being engineered for comfort, especially for longer trips. So that's definitely happening. And they're advertised as such, as being something that you could fit your family in, right? So they're larger, but they're also more comfortable. So there's attention to detail in terms of like, what's it made out of? A quiet car is also something that we still are, striving for. So luxury cars even today are known for being really quiet, having a quiet ride in the cabin. That is something else that's also there. And then one of the things you do see from trailer advertisements is, and we saw it a little bit with the Gilkey, that it's easy to pool. It's something that you also see with streamlined trailers, so that you wouldn't have to get another car or upgrade your car in order to pool your trailer. Sometimes you did, right? Especially if you had something so large. But I think that was one of the allures of the Gilkey Popup Camper.
Yeah, totally. I think that I'm imagining that a lot of rental car companies start popping up around this time when the national parks are really promoting these road trips, and Fred Harvey is promoting his line of hotels and experiences. I have one more question from Shoshana, our curator, and it says, in research I did for a car exhibition back in 2014, there was a definite attention to the idea of car ownership as making day trips into the great outdoors possible. This is entirely anecdotal, but I do think that car manufacturers use the outdoors as a selling point. So it's not a question. It's a great little factoid.
Thank you, Shoshana. Thank you.
So do we have any more questions? I don't see any coming through. So I just want to thank Isabel for joining us tonight and for all of our members for attending tonight's program. If you would like to stay in touch with the Wilsonian, please subscribe to our newsletter. Or if you'd like to share the gift of art, design, and history to a friend or a loved one, please consider gifting a Wilsonian membership. I actually have to catch a plane right now. So good night, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of the evening.
Thanks, Britt. Thank you, everyone. Safe
Thanks,
travels.
Isabel. Thank you.